trying to tell you, they may take the doors off your car when they go past. They got their helmet. Very good. You're trying to get them go down here.
I wanted independence. Independence to flexibility. I didn't know where to get it, but I knew it was not in traditional medicine. So I said goodbye to the doctors after they told me that I had very short life expectancy. I was already, by the time I was 29, suffering from old age diseases, and I moved on into freedom. I joined the hippie revolution, and now, 2 generations later, and thinking about Max Planck, one of the great nuclear electromagnetic revolutionaries and physicists, he said, as far as a new paradigm shift taking place within the community, within scientific community, it is not won in academia through arguments. What happens, the old studies die off, and the new paradigm becomes self-evident. Well, the first paradigm shift took place by becoming self-evident that vegetarianism was okay. Not only that, was it natural. Now everybody, when they're grabbing their steak or having their burger and whatever it might be, they're excusing themselves, saying, well, I know I shouldn't be eating this. Everybody now knows that they shouldn't be eating this, corpses. Then the second shift that place is the green bra revolution. Now if you're not green, you know you're not clean. We have celebrated a few days ago, yesterday, independence. Well, independence, what? To abuse yourself? Independence to be addicted? Independence to be sick? That's what people are fought for. I am talking about now the new paradigm shift. A shift to revolution. Revolution against the medical establishment. A revolution against death and dying. The independence that we can walk into so that we will never have colds except for healing crisis, or else when we backslid and had some ice cream. But none of those serious colds that everybody's dealing with, or those headaches that everybody's living with, or the medications with all kinds of side effects that everyone seems to be indulging in, thinks it's the norm and natural because it's on television. No. We're looking at a major shift. A shift that was so clearly and euphorically defined and described in a poetic fashion in the Book of Jubilee, one of the many books that come out of the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Essene ministry that goes way back 2,000 years ago. When these individuals went off to the desert to seek enlightenment, Edgar Casey wrote a whole book on the Essenes, how they came and got together, saw that civilization sucked, and they moved on. Let's go out to the desert and hang out there and wait for the Messiah, because they saw the time coordinates were right on. You know, every 2,000, some cool dude or gal comes through and brings the light, the message of truth. Well, they saw that the time was right, and they needed a body, and they figured the best body would be one of detoxified cleansing, so they initiated purification rituals in the desert. Not only the inner circle of maidens who were to receive that energy and to be impregnated by the cosmos, the zodiac, and give birth to the Christ energy that came within the Essene community. And they took on a lifestyle that was conducive to longevity. The average lifespan in those days was around 30 years. If you were 35, you were considered very old. Well, now, when you're 70, you're considered very old. I heard some people at Hippocrates say, hey, old man, all right, so I'm 70 is something. I call that just the beginning. We can work with the barometers that dial ourselves degenerate as our medical culture encourages, or we can rejuvenate as our raw lifestyle with detoxification makes it possible. So they practiced cleansing, purification, living with living foods. That was the first time wheatgrass was mentioned the elixir of immortality. This was Jesus' words put into the manuscripts. See Gospel of Peace, Volume 4, straight out of the Habsburg Library, the Vatican Library. Well, those people, comparison to the rest of the population of Mediterranean, Northern Africa, Southern Europe, who were living into their 30s, they were living on the average 124, according to historian Joseph. Well, the Book of Jubilees talks about something even more profound. They had to check out because of the Roman Empire was closing in, so they decided we're going to leave this establishment, and they disappeared that scene, but they had left behind the message in scrolls. And the Book of Jubilee talks about a time will come when the children will once again follow the commandments and study the laws, and there will be no more sickness, no more disease, and no more aging. And all will be like children, totally happy, joyous was the word, not blit, and not the result of any kind of anthropotropic or psychotropic paraphernalia that the medical community distributes. No, because of the joy that happens within a natural consciousness when you are electrochemically charged and operating on the full capacity. And that means on an alkaline diet. And they said, and they will live longer than ever in this venue. They will live thousands of years. Possibly the book of Genesis, and Methuselah was doing something right. Can he do something right like that too? Well, the resurgent, I'm going to skip a lot of steps in between and we'll go backwards and forwards. But if you think about already the research associated with physical mortality is there. First of all, it has been believed by our nutritional community, our nutritionists and dietitians, that the average life expectancy of cells is no more than 80 reproductions. However, the research that has been going on in the past, that has been done by many Nobel Prize recipients, in the book Man the Unknown, they describe the work with tissue cultures, where the tissue cultures were able to be kept beyond the 80 into the millions and millions of reproductions. Alexis Carrel was the Nobel Prize recipient that was doing this kind of work. But even more so later came about Julian Huxley, who was a great biologist from University of Chicago. And there was also the great researcher and the Nobel Prize recipient, Dr. Child, who was working with basically worms. And just think about ourselves. I mean, we're nothing but a worm. Long GI tract starting with your mouth and ending with your anus, and with a lot of tentacles on the side. And then sometimes it's a source of fashion and beauty, and some people are not altogether satisfied with what they have. They go through all kind of augmentation. But the whole idea, we do have this GI tract, and the worm is a good subject to study. And they found that as long as the worms were taken, because they have such a short lifespan, as long as the worms were fasted periodically, they noticed 17 generations later, the worms were still as young as they were when they started the experiment. There was no aging there. The fasting is the key driving force, because no matter how much of an optimal nutritional program for your particular human makeup you might be thriving on, you still are creating metabolic waste. Just like in the Bible they talk, and on the seventh day God rested. And you need time out for recovery, away from activity, flush out the residuals that are waste that is generated, give our immune system a chance to catch up with the inventory of waste product. Disease and aging is nothing more than accumulation of metabolic waste of toxemia associated to exaggerated volume of consumption. In terms of our life expectancy potential, all we need to do is start rethinking the way we approach longevity. We think, well, gee whiz, we're doing very well, 80 years, 90 years of life. However, in comparison to the cats, or the dogs, or the parrots, we're living a very short time. If we switched our head here, started using more biological clocks instead of the solar clocks, which are time frame around the sun, because biologically, it takes for a cat within a matter of 6 months, they reach maturity and they're able to reproduce themselves. And they're able to go through easily through 40 reproductions of this cycle within their lifespan. So they live 20 years, which is about 40 half a years. Well, if it takes humans at the age of 15 or 20 to reach sexual maturity for reproduction, well, if you multiply that by 40, you're already talking about 800 years as far as solar around the clock. That's why Methuselah was a great possibility. I described a very close to that kind of direction, Mr. Lee, who was written up in 1933 in New York Times, who died at the age of 256. His lifespan was well attested in by Chinese empires, who every 50 years they gave him a new award for his contributions to teaching about the principles of health and longevity. But our aging and degeneration has a lot to do with what we are consuming. And we are, as a human life form, the only life form on the planet, with the exception of our pets and the domesticated animals, that try to live on processed dead food. Everything else lives on enzymatically active foods that are alkaline, 100% alkalinity. Most people that are dieting right now in our culture living on 100% acidic food. What is alkaline? Alkaline foods are raw greens, raw vegetables, some of the fruit, very few of the fruit. Most of the fruit is a very acid. You're shopping at Whole Foods and you taste the grapes or the strawberries. It's almost like biting into vinegar. You can stick a pH meter in there and you'll see it's registering somewhere around 4, which is Coca-Cola pH. You're acidifying yourself, you're melting down your dental, you're melting down your bone mass. Long enough practice of these, a diet oriented toward acid fruit, it leads to lesions along the GI tract. As in my book, Life in the 21st Century, I describe several of the communities who are doing an all-fruitarian type of diets in the tropics, very ideal environment. But in spite of the fact being relatively even tree ripe in there. No, in the tropics, the gorilla, the strongest animal in terms of muscular development, lives on greens. The strongest other mammalian animal lives on greens. That is the power food. And it's the one that is most abundantly available. If we all started moving in the direction as a global, going raw, just like the rest of the planet, there will be no disease. Our medical establishment can be displaced, so can our military, because if you start eating raw, there is no need for military. You feel at one with one another and cooperatively instead of aggressively trying to strike out a living and find enough real estate in order to be able to acquire and maintain your lifestyle. Over 80% of the planetary land is being utilized for animal husbandry. And they're the #1 pollutants moving into the greenhouse effect. And we go out fighting for wars because we have killed those animals, consumed adrenaline, consumed pituitary glandular secretions, which makes for fear and stressful internal environment and disease building. And we are in a state of fear. As a result, we are in defensive mode. And our needs are endless, because we have gone insane and we are creating a world that is of materialism instead of realizing we are spiritual beings having a physical experience and are intended to be here in a schoolhouse of enlightenment instead of the prison of degeneration, an insane asylum. They teach you lifestyles that are suicidal in schools, and they encourage behavior that is guaranteed to kill you off by the time you were 70. The number 1, number 2, and number 3 cause of death. Number 1 is called present-day cancer. Number 2, it's called cardiovascular disease. Number 3, by their own self-admonition, and you can go to Mercola.com and it has all the documentation. It is the faulty application of medicine, medical intervention. But if you go to number 1, cancer therapy, why are people killed and die from cancer? Is because they went for medical treatment. Dr. John Gaynor, a cancer statistics specialist from University of California in Berkeley, his studies show that the average life expectancy if you get chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery is about 2.5 years, 3.5 years. If you do nothing, it's 12 years. Helsinki's study in relationship to the second most deadly disease, which the most popular drugs for management of cardiovascular diseases are to address high blood pressure and to address also cholesterol. Helsinki's study showed those who abstained from medication for treatment of these diseases outlived those who ended up getting treated for those diseases, and they died prematurely from all kinds of other degenerative diseases. Now, what is the treatment for these kind of conditions? Well, these conditions exist. Something has to be done. Well, not only raw foodism will do that treatment, but if even without raw foodism, the medical community has already found the answer, except it's kind of keeping it in a more restricted sense, and you've got to go on Google to find the answer. Dr. Max Wolf, as an example, of Fordham University, his research, and he was a pioneer in enzymology in terms of concentrating enzymes and making them purified enough so that they don't cause an allergic reaction. His research has shown that over 95% of success with all forms of cardiovascular diseases by administering enzymes. Dr. Chin-Po Kim treated all forms of cancer with 79% success, published in medical journals. So it is no secret that, number 1, if proper medication was given, obviously they're mistreating their clients by giving them the kind of medication which leads to their death. So the first cause of death is medical intervention. The second cause of death is medical intervention. The third cause of death is medical intervention. You have access to not only total wellness, but also long-term health. Overeating, disorganized food that has been exposed to fire, even at University of Harvard. If you go to May 23rd, 2002, New York Times, the science section. They usually don't give for any presentation more than a half a page. This was a 2-page presentation coming out of Harvard Medical School. The head of Harvard Medical School declared that they had discovered major inflammatory condition that is in everybody because of increased microscopic magnification, that they have been able to develop the technology to observe the blood so they could see more details of the blood. And they found that the blood is flooded with twisted proteins. Now, and they went further. It's causing aggravation and irritation and a 24/7 ongoing inflammatory condition that is aggravating the immune system and leaving you compromised. And they went out to take that posture, that with the word qualifier, possibly all diseases from Alzheimer's to asthma to emphysema to cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, etc., are directly caused by this condition. Now, in my book, Survival in the 21st Century, I already talked 35 years ago how by applying heat, the protein is not only disorganized, but it becomes indigestible, and incompletely metabolized fragments end up creating stress on your immune system. Because what is not digested ends up quite a bit as being feed for the pathogenic microbes and viruses that end up proliferating and causing plagues and all kind of flu conditions, as well as it gets to the interior of their system. Dr. John Gaynor in Science News 1972 showed under the traditional dietary intake, over 60% of oxygen transport capacity is affected by your cooked food dietary choices. The average SAD type of meal, standard American diet. Now, you cannot live on a radical oxygen presence reduction. Every metabolic reaction in your body is dependent on oxygen. What can the body do? It would die from asphyxiation if somehow or other it was shut off from this oxygen supply that it needs. Besides, the oxygen supply is already radically reduced by our lifestyles on planet Earth. Our technological society is consuming oxygen about 5 times faster than it is being produced by plant life. We have reduced our oxygen capacity, oxygen levels from 500 years ago to where it was 40%, down to about 15% right now on planet Earth. And not to have everyone labeled as anemic on this planet, the medical society came up with a cure. It was called reducing the standards. So now only 60% of America is anemic. University of Florida, Department of Agriculture did a study with children. Over 120,000 children were involved, and they found over 60% of the kids attending school were anemic. How can they study? How can they concentrate without adequate transport of oxygen throughout not only their body systems for physical stamina, but also for mental activity? And the brain has the highest oxygen requirements of all other body organs per pound mass. So oxygen systems are greatly compromised. Dr. John Gaynor, his study was pioneer. I was pursuing to try to understand how the whole cancer mechanism operates. I started with the premise that the body does not make mistakes, and cancer is important to the whole body ecology systems as a response that creates conditions of survival. And all of a sudden, years later, 30 years later, what I wrote was proving not only correct because it's part of the immune system, your cancer cells. Just like the white blood cells function in your body to part of the police force that deals with environmental contaminants, as well as toxic thoughts, as well as also all kinds of stress factors, as well as also poorly digested food. Or Dr. Kauchikov, prior to the work of Dr. Kauchikov, it was believed that it was natural after a cooked meal, after a meal, not the word cooked, it was believed that the only way to eat food was cooked. After a meal, post-meal leukocytosis is a natural metabolic condition that is normal, natural. And after looking Dr. Couchifel didn't buy into that. And he took people on utilizing smoked food, utilizing cooked food at low temperature, and raw foods, and fed people with different type of foods. Well, with smoked food, it led to, after the meal and in the middle of the meal, the increase in white blood cell by as much as 500%. That's equivalent to being poisoned by rat poison. Okay? Cooked food led to increase by 300%. Raw food, 0 increase in white blood cell. White blood cell numbers are a reflection of the kind of dietary habits as well as the kind of toxic environment that you are immersed in. A healthy individual living in a clean environment, not that such an environment exists, but living in relatively clean, let's say, mountains away from civilization, would have hardly any white blood cells of raw food. Because there's no need for them. They are created on demand basis. Okay, and the same damn thing applies to cancer cells. Cancer cells are, according to Dr. Williams, and now it's accepted in oncology, the fact that everyone has cancer cells. Everybody has cancer cells. And they function in a very most productive way. Dr. Williams, in the book Enzymes, the Fountain of Life, written with two other medical doctors, Mielke and Lopez, he says that everybody has cancer cells, and I don't understand very well what are they doing here. I happen to be lucky enough with my intuitive psychic abilities at Harvard Medical Library found the documentations that answer that question. First of all, the production of cancer cells how is it triggered and why is it produced, and under what are the conditions that lead to production of cancer cells. And there is only one cause for which understanding of it. Dr. Otto Warburger, Nobel Prize recipient in 1936, the ultimate cause of cancer, is he found by taking normal tissue cultures from your body and putting it on a petri dish, namely something for those cells to eat, and he put it inside of a glass dome which was insulated and proceeded to withdraw oxygen. When he withdrew the oxygen levels by as little as 30%, within 2 days the cancer cells either have died off, the living cells either died off or mutated to cancer cells. The cancer cells now operate on a different, lower oxygen metabolism. They feed on sugars, they feed on ferments. And why are they there? Well, University of Wisconsin showed why they're there. They're important, and I will announce it in a few seconds. But just connecting to the fact that John Gaynor showed that radical reduction in oxygen in the bloodstream by as much as 60% by SAD diet, and reduction in oxygen when it is localized to any regions of poor circulation in your body, leads to the cells within 48 hours, a whole bunch of them, to start mutating into cancer cells, normal tissue cells. And what is the purpose of all this activity, namely production of cancer cells? Well, Dr. LePage, Dr. Midler, other researchers, they called cancer cells protein tracks, nitrogen garbage cans. And nitrogen is the signature mineral for protein. They act, the cancer cells, like vacuum cleaners, zooming around your body, sucking up circulatory protein fragments out of circulation so that oxygen transport can take place, so that you don't die from asphyxiation. Alexis Carrel said, when the body is subject to stress, it innovates systems of behavior that assures its physical survival at the expense of immediate physical survival, at the expense of vitality and longevity, which are diminished. as Dr. Spendler of Institute of Traumatology shows, there's an inverse relationship between high protein, heat-treated protein consumption and longevity. The more you consume, the shorter you live. So these cancer cells are basically produced as a response to the circulatory protein fragments. And according to University of Wisconsin, which I document all this from medical journals, I was a theoretical mathematician at one time. I applied the same levels of thinking. Doesn't matter whether I was studying art history, aesthetics, or I was doing English, advanced English, or psychology. The same thing. Mathematics trains you into the gymnastics of the mind. It doesn't matter where you're at. Life is the same. Follow the money. And create some good theories, good spins. And that's what theories are, good spins that help to organize information, facts. And that's what I'm doing. So, University of Wisconsin showed that cancer cells absorb 20 times more protein fragments faster than normal tissue cultures. In other words, they act like that vacuum cleaner. Parallel to that, according to work that was done by Ernst Freud, a German physician, he showed that anybody that has cancer, advanced cancer, they have also advanced degenerative cardiovascular system, and vice versa. Actually, those two systems function parallel in management of circulatory protein fragments so you don't die of asphyxiation. So cancer cells end up being a circulatory vacuum cleaner, and the bloodstream system ends up being sweeping the dirt under the rug, which is you got 60,000 plus miles of blood vessels inside of your system, a fancy plumbing job. And if you took a garden hose and sliced it, you'll see 4 layers. Well, the human bloodstreams are very similar to that. And what the body does is stores it in between the first layer and the second, this garbage, so that it reduces, again, asphyxiation. The work for this was done by 3 German medical doctors, Wen, W-E-N-D, and you can find the details associated with this in Conscious Eating of Dr. Gabriel Cousins. I turned him on to this research. It was about 70 pages that was translated into English, and he ended up incorporating into his book that information. So you have 2 parallel tracks of management of circulatory waste products associated with protein. Another management system associated with exaggerated intake of heat-treated fats. When you got the raw fats, the body transports them to the extremities and they're stored there. When you got heat-treated fats, they don't circulate well. They end up being stuck in the cardiovascular system. They end up being stuck in the organs, and they end up causing early troubles. And it's becoming one of the entry diseases. Just like there's entry drugs. Well, the entry drug for degeneration and sickness is called cooked food. Well, the human organism manages the circulatory ingestion of heat-treated fats by creating fatty cells and obesity. These are storage canisters for circulatory fat. Circulatory fat causes the red blood cells to clump. Many of you have had white live cell analysis, dark field microscopy. You've seen clumping of cells that don't travel well into the extremities, the red blood cells. Red blood cells are too damn big in size to go into the fine capillaries. And the only way they can do that in the fine capillaries, transporting nutrition and transporting oxygen, is like a pancake. They flip over, they become half the size, and now they can go inside. But if you got 2, 3, 10 of them sticking together, they can't do the flip. As a result, they circulate in the bigger veins and arteries, and they end up being deposited systemically, either stored in fatty tissues or in the cardiovascular system within this arena, causing the complications. Now, difference between heat-treated fat and raw fat is big. Eskimos, the word Eskimo means one who eats raw.